We're going to have a lot of fun. We know this hummingbird chart is a mathematical fake, and in late January, I think early February this year, Unheard managed to find out about extra cases that Letby wasn't on shift for, that would have distorted this chart in Letby's favour. But the problem with all of these cases, as we know from the leaked JRM email, is that all of the cases that were passed on to the police had already been cherry picked by the consultants. So this is from JR, and should we highlight explicitly for these cases that Letby was in attendance and in close proximity to the incubators, in order to have their interest piqued, as he wrote. So what we really need is for someone to go in and have a look at the collapses that occurred during the indictment period. Well, not even the indictment period, but we'll say during the indictment period, and do a blind study to identify the quote unexplained collapses, although that doesn't mean they're suspicious. But if we look at unexplained collapses, and we could see who was on shift for them, not that it means that, if someone was on shift for all of them, it doesn't mean that they've done anything wrong, but just as an exercise, if someone could do that, that would be great. Well, that did happen. I've already given a spoiler to the results in the previous video, but we're going to go through this crucial blind study that John Gibbs and Ian Murphy done, and we know it's crucial because the results are not talked about in the Thirlwall inquiry. In fact, they're specifically avoided. So that's why we know there's something fishy going on. So this is the blind study occurred during the Silver Command operation that I talked about in July 2016 in the previous video. So, this email is from John Gibbs probably about 6 months later, and he's just trying to remember what they'd done. So, and he's telling his team, "Dear all, please see my other email concerning my discussion with Ian Harvey last week. Attached is the health record review that Anne Martin and I undertook of infants who collapsed/deteriorated in our neonatal unit and needed transfer elsewhere from June 15th to July 16th. So that's the indictment period. Incidentally, the reason he's looking at the infants that needed transfer elsewhere is because they're going to be the more serious collapses, obviously, if they have to go to a higher graded unit. Makes sense. Anne and I initially looked at a larger group of patients who required transfer out during that time period. Can't remember exactly how many, perhaps 30 or more. Any who had a problem that would automatically require transfer, e.g. significant bowel malformation, severe congenital heart disease, were excluded. And some of these sorts of patients had already been excluded by various senior nurses and risk managers before Anne and I started working through the list of remaining transfer patients. Admittedly, this was a very subjective review, but I felt the deterioration leading to transfer was reasonably explained. I was not looking for certainty. Then these infants were excluded. This left a relatively small group of inadequately explained deterioration / collapses needing transfer out. So again, we're just looking at unexplained. I looked through the health records, and Anne Martin, who later becomes Anne McGlade, took notes which included recording the ID of each infant. I deliberately did not want to know which staff had been looking after the infant. I only looked at the paper health record, so I could not avoid seeing which doctor had made entries in the notes, and they sometimes mentioned other doctors involved at various points in a patient's care, and occasionally mentioned a nurse who had been involved, but for the most of the cases, during most of the care, I was intentionally ignorant of which nurses were involved. Okay, so a blind study, as well as we can do. Anne did look up the nursing notes on Meditech and reported what these said to supplement the health records that I was reading, but whilst she could see which nurse had made each entry, she did not tell me, nor did Anne include any info about named nurses in the notes she made on each patient. When we finished the review, Anne gave the notes she made to one of the senior nurses, I think it was Sean Williams, and we had understood that with the help of colleagues in HR, there would be an analysis of the nurses and doctors on duty when each patient deteriorated / collapsed, not just the nurses assigned to the patient for that shift, although that info would clearly also be included. Unfortunately, we have not received any feedback on our review and had no idea what the staffing analysis revealed until Ian sent the attachment to me at the end of last week after I asked for this info at our meeting. Since Anne and I didn't keep a photocopy of the notes taken during our review, I can't remember exactly why I was concerned about the patients we highlighted, because I think it had been about 6 months or more, nor even the IDs of these patients. I had thought that Anne and I only highlighted about 6 patients, can't remember the exact number, but Anne feels likewise as being inadequately explained, and I admit that I set a high threshold, so I'm not claiming that there couldn't be anything unusual about some of the other infants transferred out of the unit. It's just that I thought that there was a reasonable explanation for their deterioration / collapse. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Although, so he's only highlighted 6 unusual collapses in that period, and all the rest there's a reasonable explanation. Although I thought we had highlighted about 6 inadequately explained patients. The attachment that Ian sent me contains 17. Perhaps these were all the patients that Anne and I reviewed before we selected out of those that were inadequately explained, but I thought the number was closer to 30 or even more. Ian has told me that this attachment is a transcription of the notes we made. Apparently the comments shown in red are those that Anne and I highlighted as showing unusual, unexpected or inadequately explained events. Only 6 of the patients in the attachment have such red comments, so perhaps these are indeed the patients with inadequately explained collapses / deteriorations that Anne and I highlighted. This is certainly similar to the number we both thought we'd identified. However, looking at this info now, I'm not sure why some of the red comments were thought to indicate unexplained events. And also there are 1 or 2 patients in the list without red comments in whom unusual events seem to have occurred, but perhaps when I was looking through the notes these didn't raise concerns. Ian has added comments in blue from his review of each case and this includes comments about some of the staff involved, which is not the sort of comprehensive staffing analysis that Anne and I thought was going to be performed, but perhaps this has actually been undertaken and someone has this info somewhere. So I don't think John ever sees these results. And as I hinted at last time, what we've got, well, let's take a look at what was said in Thirlwall. It would appear that of the 17 babies reviewed, Dr. Gibbs and Nurse Martin identified 6 cases in which it appeared that something unexpected or unusual occurred. Of these 6, Letby had been involved with 3, just 3 of the 6 at the time concerned, and had been involved in prior care for 1 further baby. We'll be considering whether the parameters of this review were appropriate to address the concerns raised by the consultants, and investigating what, if anything, was done as a result of its conclusions. Well, so that's what they feel they want to investigate, whether the parameters were good enough. But when we go to the transcripts, who have I got first? I have Anne McGlade. So this is Anne Martin. She's now Anne McGlade, and she's being asked about this review with Gibbs. And the only points of note is that they came up with these 6 cases, and one of the questions is, one of the very few questions is, did you regard that as a very small number and not a cause for concern, or did you think, gosh, that's quite a lot of cases where we don't have an explanation? And McGlade answers, I think personally that's quite a lot, yes. And then well, the reason for this question is like they're trying to imply 6 is a lot of unexplained cases, but they're implying here with that question, they're implying that Letby was on shift for all 6, and you would think when discussing this review about what they done, you would think they might ask the results when discussing it with Anne Martin, and yet they don't. The questions just come to an end, and they never discuss anything about what the end results were. And I thought that's a bit odd. I mean, they've done a whole section on a review they've done of these unexplained deaths and who was on shift, and they don't discuss the results. I thought, well, surely they'll discuss it with John Gibbs then. Well, let's take a look. You and Anne Martin were asked to investigate babies who were transferred out of the unit. They go on to ask him about how they went about this. And Gibbs, so like I said, this was at the time of the Silver Command analysis, and Gibbs mentions the findings of the hospital's internal review was presented on the 13th of July, so we saw all of those charts about the acuity of the babies. Now, I was part of the review doing this particular review of patients transferred out of the unit. That didn't actually feature in the presentation. I thought it was going to. Okay. And again, the line of questioning just tapers off, and they again never express, they never talk about the results. And it's sort of implied that of these 6 unexplained collapses, that Letby was always on shift. It was only that one statement at the very beginning of the Thirlwall inquiry, where on page 100, that I actually found those results, and it's been like a year of me looking for them. And here is the results of the review that Anne and John done, and all we've got is a load of blank pages. Irrelevant and sensitive, irrelevant and sensitive. Child E, child F, irrelevant and sensitive. And the reason it's INS is because these babies aren't on the indictment. So what does that tell you? I mean, even when John Gibbs said he passed the results to Sean Williams, I was even reading her transcript. Again, they never talked about the results of those 6 unexplained collapses. And so I would actually say that this blind study that isn't talked about, that puts Letby on duty for 50%, is of way more significance than even that unheard article. And also, not only that, but the ones that did appear on that were unexpected collapses, they are not on the indictment. So therefore you could say that those are the cases that were on the indictment, John Gibbs had deemed explainable. So I think this is a lot bigger story than I made it in my original video. Let me know what you think.